Hello YouTube, there have been some changes for Warcraft 3. How long will they stay for? It's in the PTR at the moment, that's the public test realm, so that's where you test the patch before it goes live. So it's not live yet, but if it does go live, you're going to have some funky things happening. So the team at Warcraft 3, whoever they may be, some say it's just Playside, who are essentially like a third party, well, I wouldn't say program, but kind of, where they just sort of service the Warcraft 3 now, probably maintenance style, and keep it up to date every few months maybe. So this is what we've got. Today we've deployed our first 1.36.2 update build to the Warcraft 3 Reforged PTR. This patch will feature tournament changes, map pool updates, and balance adjustments. These are always the laziest changes you can do, by the way, because it doesn't affect anything that's mechanical within the game, like giving us hotkeys, for example, that we should really have got because they got it in StarCraft Remastered. That was one of the things I really wanted from Reforged, but, you know, stuff that effectively really changes the game. All that stuff is kind of being implemented now because it was the previous team's work that had sort of been backlogged from, like, many years ago and gradually implemented by sort of, like, the skeleton crew that were effectively in Blizzard for the last couple of years. So yeah, you're just going to kind of get, oh, this map has changed, and oh, this unit does something slightly different. It's like, it's not going to be, you know, mind-blowing, but at least balance-wise, it's kind of funny. Because, starting off with balance, Polymorph now targets heroes. So this has never happened before. Polymorph has never been able to target heroes, at least from what I can remember in the game. Unless you go all the way back to Alpha, perhaps. It lasts for 3 seconds. Now, Polymorph is expensive. I think it's like 220 mana. It might have been reduced to 200 mana in one of the previous patches. I'm not 100% sure with you. But this is too strong. As a human, well, I don't know. I am a human player, but I just kind of play random, so it doesn't matter too much. It's not acceptable, I think, for 3 seconds. At max 2 seconds, but even that is taking the mick. Now, there are ways to counter this, because in the late game you're expected to have Dispel, Abolish Magic, Destroyers that can absorb magic, you know, Priests to dispel magic, Spirit Walkers to disenchant and remove, Shamans to purge. So those types of dispels are cheaper than the cast of Polymorph, but bear in mind that Polymorph belongs to human, and human tend to go Archmage, human tend to have Brilliance Aura. Brilliance Aura increases the mana regeneration, and if you get master units in terms of casters, they have a better mana regeneration as well as a larger mana pool. So all of that combined can kind of compete a little bit with the level of dispel that the opponent is going to need. So Hex is incredibly strong. A lot of new players to Warcraft 3 would probably think, oh, this ability doesn't do any damage. It just basically incapacitates the hero or the unit. But it's actually incredibly, I want to say overpowered, but it is very, 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 very strong Hex. It's essentially a free unit kill most of the time. Because if it's on a unit, it sits there for ages. It can move, but it moves at like 1 mile an hour. It's kind of like an entangle, as long as you've got an army behind it that can hit the unit, and the opponent either has to abandon the unit, or they have to just kind of like last hit and kill their own unit to deny you experience if you hex their unit. And it can be used on heroes, and it's incredibly strong because it can stop you from getting experience. So if, say for example, you're creeping an ogre camp and you're just about to kill the ogre and the opponent hexes you, you don't actually get the experience from killing that ogre, even though you got the last hit on that ogre and you got the gold and they got the item, but you didn't get the experience. But not to mention, that's just a little thing. The fact that it can incapacitate you for so long and basically make it so that you can't actually do anything. It's incredibly strong. So imagine units that can do this. 2 food units. You only need a few of them. And you could actually deny your opponent from town portaling or something. Because I'm pretty sure you can't town portal when you, well, been hexed. Because there is no such thing as polymorph on heroes yet, so we don't have that tested. Maybe it lets you double click the town portal whilst you're polymorphed. That might be one way to deal with it. But I think at the moment, any form of oh god, I can't do that word now. Why can I not do that word? Incapacitate. There we go. Incapacitation. Like the video of I Can't Talk. Polymorph Should it last on heroes? That's the question. Do you think yes or no? Write that in the YouTube comments below. I think it probably shouldn't. Or if it does, it should be something like 1 second, honestly. Maybe 0.5 seconds. But then you'd wonder, why would I spend 200 plus mana to incapacitate someone? Maybe that 0.5 seconds is important enough to make it worthwhile. Because honestly, in PvP at higher levels, it's kind of strong to incapacitate your opponent. It's why invulnerability potion is bought so often, because you can't be incapacitated when you've been made invulnerable. So, this is a big one, really. I've talked about this before I've talked about anything else. I still haven't moved on to anything. I don't think Polymorph should be able to target heroes, but I kind of get the reasoning behind it. This is one of those patches where they basically have changed a bunch of things that no one did anything with in the first place. So it's like the safest type of patch you can do. It's like, oh, hey, people don't use Polymorph. People don't use Taurens. People don't use Priests of the Moon. Let's just do something wacky with them. And then maybe tone it down based on the feedback that given by the community. So I think 1 second max duration, probably. Because even 2 seconds is kind of long. And that sounds dumb, doesn't it? To say, oh, it only lasts 1 second. But if you get enough orcs, you can kind of chain CC someone. However, we can compare this to Cyclone. You can Cyclone a hero for 6 seconds, which is a pretty long time, but you can't target that hero or do any damage. So it has to be like a quarter as long as Cyclone at most, I think, because you've got to take into consideration that you can actually hit your opponent whilst you've got them incapacitated, whereas in Cyclone you can't. That's why Cyclone, 6 seconds is a long time, but you've got to remember you can't do anything to them apart from surround them. So what could you do to Polymorph otherwise? My suggestion would be to make it so it doesn't target heroes, but probably cost something like 150 mana instead of the 200 plus. And maybe doesn't last quite so long on units, because at the moment I think it lasts like a minute. So if you made it like 125 to 150 mana, and then made it last 20 to 30 seconds maximum on units, you might actually see it get used a bit more strategically, where people might polymorph 1 or 2 targets, but not like everything, just to sort of make it so the opponent's pressure to use like their dispel. Maybe. It's a difficult unit because, again, like, I'm still talking about this, surprisingly, but human tend to do priests and rifles a lot in their games. They don't really use sorks all that often. Not as much as they want to use priests. So this is to maybe make sorks get used more, but you let me know. Suering Blades now requires an upgrade again. So Suering Blades is the extra additional damage that knights do with their normal melee attack versus medium armor. And people complain because it does so much damage to fiends and mountain giants, and now at least, you know, it's delayed a little bit. That's probably okay. Orc. Tauren now are available at tier 2. Pulverized, it's pulverized, but pulverized still requires tier 3. Orc are kind of getting everything at tier 2 now. I wouldn't be surprised if the next patch is basically Berserker Headhunters at tier 2. And maybe Tiny Great Hall at tier 2 as well. I don't know what you can really do to Taurens other than to make them cheaper for people to want to build them. Because remember, they're on a separate building, so you need a Tauren totem, which is really where I think the lack of Tauren come from. If you made it so that they built from the Spirit Lodge or the Bestiary, I honestly think they would actually be implemented by Orc players a lot more often. Maybe replacing Grunts from tier 2 onwards if they were to stay at tier 2, but really maybe they should be tier 3, but they should be available from the Bestiary or the Spirit Lodge, and a little bit cheaper in terms of gold, so that way you feel like, yeah, that's worth buying. Because at the moment, Orc basically don't need to go to tier 3. They don't need to get Taurens. They're very focused on like Grunts, Raiders, Kodo, maybe Shaman for Purge. Control, essentially. They're very focused on control. Control on their opponent's economy, on their opponent's decisions. Hit and run. Taurens are slow. Taurens are clunky. Taurens are very heavy on food cost. They kind of slow you down, really. Even if you could get them at tier 2. I'm not 100% sure if Orcs will want to buy them unless they're just looking for a replacement for a Grunt. Give them hardened skin. I what if they had like 2 upgrades? Maybe Pulverize was the tier 3 one, and a tier 2 they could get. Well, then you'd have to build them at tier 2 if they had an upgrade at tier 2. But yeah, I don't know about hardened skin, hardened hoofs, maybe. Some sort of like more fun, weaker version, or just put it into Pulverize so they're a bit tougher, kind of like the Berserker strength for grunts, where they get a bit more health and a bit more damage. Like the Pulverize is a bit more damage because it gets a higher proc chance when they upgrade it, and maybe give them a bit more health or something as a consequence, although they already have a lot of health, so maybe 1 more armor. I don't know. You'd have to be an expert at melee for that, and that is not what I am, because I play 4 versus 4 RT, and 4 versus 4 RT is full of trash people. Yeah. Night Elf. Priestess of the Moon. Searing Arrows mana cost reduced from 8 to 5. That's a good change. It's much more fun. Incinerate's been a lot more fun to use now that it only costs 3 mana. Instead of like the 6 mana it was before. Priestess of the Moon. Searing Arrows damage increased. It does quite a lot of damage, actually. It's kind of underestimated. Honestly. You'd be surprised just how much a Priest of the Moon can actually nuke you down if she gets like a couple of claws plus the Searing Arrows. If she stutter step micro on your ass. So I'm not sure if Searing Arrows should get buffed to that much. Because you think 40 extra damage on every single attack. And they're going to potentially, like, if you get Gloves of Haste with her, she could be really strong then. But Mountain Giant, oh yeah, we can still talk about the Priest of the Moon. Yeah, that's basically all the changes you get. I suppose she still probably wouldn't be picked. She's in this difficult position where she just doesn't have enough useful abilities, I think. Because I think mostly bears Night Elf prioritize bears, so they're not really prioritizing ranged. If they were doing a lot more Dryad, Archer, Druid of the Talon gameplay, Priest of the Moon with these buffs could actually be a lot more used, I think. However, I don't know if Night Elf want to change from bears. Unless there's an incentivization to change from bears, I don't think they're going to want to get Priest of the Moon. It is what it is. Kind of similar deal with Dreadlord, right? He's got Vampiric Aura. That's kind of awesome, Vampiric Aura. It's not as good as the other auras, but when you think about lifesteal, it's kind of a treasured thing. Like, orcs love getting the lifesteal item. That really helps them out a lot. So, it's just not as good as the Death Knight. And his aura. He's just flat out a better hero. Flat out better for everything that the undead represents. The movement speed. The healing. It even heals mechanical. Unholy aura. It's just so fucking versatile. It's ridiculous. So the Dreadlord kind of gets put to the side because similar deal with the Priest of the Moon. The aura, even though you think Night Elf with the mass range, it would be great. They don't really do range. They do bears. So yeah, unless you made Trusha Aura some sort of pseudo ranged melee buff, where it doesn't buff ranged as much as it currently does, but it sort of buffs both melee and ranged, so it's like a reduced amount, but it affects the whole army, kind of like a command aura type deal. Then I think you'd actually start seeing the Priest of the Moon a lot, honestly, if that was the case. Mountain Giants being down to 6 instead of 7, well, it's really difficult because Mountain Giants either are like incredibly overpowered or just almost never used. It's never a case that they're terrible or bad units, because they're always have a way to sort of like cheese or be productive in some way, shape or form. But you basically either never see them or your opponent basically builds nothing but them. So it's very difficult to sort of make changes to Mountain Giants without suddenly the meta being like, oh, everyone's building Mountain Giants now. So I genuinely don't know if reducing to 6 is going to make it that crazy. I think that's just one we'll have to have to see. It's not as obnoxious as when they had the double taunt thing and they had multiple Mountain Giants and then they all keep spamming it one after the other. So you're getting like 2 taunts per Mountain Giant and it's on like a 8 to 10 second cooldown or something. You couldn't target anything. Vorpal Blade research time reduced. I mean, why not? I think a lot of the research time should be reduced to keep the pace of the game and make more obscure units more interesting to play. So I think I'm up for that. Undead Ghoul Frenzy attack speed bonus reduced from 35 to 30. On the highest level, ghouls are actually strong. At the lower to mid levels, people can't play ghouls without losing them effectively. But if you're good enough, ghouls are actually a very effective unit for how much it costs, particularly when that Ghoul Frenzy sort of kicks in, which is the tier 3 upgrade. So that's a subtle nerf to it. That isn't huge, but should probably help out on the high level. Curse now target mechanical units. Curse is just stupidly strong. I actually don't think Curse needs a buff, really. It's like 40 mana, isn't it? And a 33% chance to miss your attacks for like a really long time. That's really bloody good. In melee situations where people are essentially auto-attacking against one another very often. You obviously have AoE spells to break that a little bit, but that's not all the time. Most of the time your units are attacking through auto-attack, not through some sort of flame strike ability or whatnot. So 33% of the time your unit is now not hitting for 40 mana. That's really strong, honestly. Think about that. Shredders, I think it's to deal with tanks. There's still some weird thing where human players are getting tanks against undead and it's somehow working. So that's what it is. And the same thing with Cripple. Apparently someone said that if you put Cripple on a tank, it takes like the tank 3 times longer now to kill a building than beforehand. So perhaps just keep the Cripple mechanic, but not the Curse. And then there'll be more incentivization to actually build a Necromancer instead of just the Banshee. Because they're always going to build a Banshee no matter what happens with Curse. Scrolls of Healing removed from the Tomb of Relics. That's interesting. I don't know if that's a major downside. It certainly does suck a little bit because that's a good item. People like to buy that. It becomes very valuable from the mid to late game onwards. Providing you've got a 60 food plus army. You'll definitely get good value from a Scroll of Rehealing. So, yeah. It's interesting they just decided to remove that. I don't know if that was like a massive issue for like, oh, these undeads with the Scroll of Healing is too strong in this latest meta or something. Wand of Negation is added. I guess that's to replace the item. Wand of Negation, if I remember correctly, it sort of has 3 charges and it dispels up to like 8 units or something. It's kind of a funky unit, a funky item that was typically from like the early days of Warcraft 3 that got removed from Reign of Chaos. I don't really... Oh no, actually Wand of Negation is the little circle. It's like the AoE thing. It's a small circle and it dispels, I think. I think that's what Wand of Negation is. There's 2 different ones, I think. It's one of those. Yeah, it's like Priest Dispel, actually, so I'm wrong on that. It is actually like Priest Dispel. That's better. I think that's a bit more... Because the other one's a bit more funky, but Wand of Negation, if it is like... yeah, Ray of Negation, that's the bounce one. Okay, thank you. So Wand of Negation, basically a Priest Dispel, so they don't have to have a Destroyer. So you could effectively dispel something using the item in your inventory. Pretty cool, actually. I wouldn't mind Wand of Negation being added to the shop, not the Tomb of Relics, so that players had an option for Dispel where they weren't able to build units that could Dispel, for example. You know? Everyone should have the accessibility to be able to Dispel. But you can't always do it through units. Sometimes the game goes in such a fashion that maybe you haven't got enough priests or you've got into this stalemate situation. Your opponent keeps sniping all your like the few spellcasters that you have, so you can't ever have that Dispel reliably. Meat Wagon, speed increased. Sure, I guess, but I don't feel like it needs it, because Undead always get Death Knight, and Death Knight increases movement speed of mechanical units as well, so they will move quickly, so not sure that's necessary. I think it's to help Necro Wagon move along the map, so perhaps, sure. I don't think it's a massive deal. Frostworm Breathing costs less, sure. It is quite a lot, 275, but then again, lumber isn't much to an undead player. When they have a couple of ghouls on wood in the late game, they typically have enough, so that doesn't really change anything. Firelord Volcano building damage factor reduced from 3 to 2. It's a bit of a shame, because I kind of like using it. It did do a lot of damage. It was pretty impressive. I don't feel like it needs to be nerfed necessarily, because Firelord's still kind of a bad hero, so... yeah. Naga Sea Witch, Tornado speed base, and minimum speed is increased. That's cool. I always thought Tornado actually, in the later times I've used it, haven't actually been so awful. I think maybe it lasts a bit too long. That might be what it's still suffering from. So it's not like the Firelord Volcano, which lasts a lot shorter but does a lot more damage. But now it doesn't really, does it? It's like 3 down to 2. So, We are updating the tournament schedule to have more 1 versus 1 and 2 versus 2 during the week, and then 3v3 and 4v4 closer to the weekends. On Sundays, removing 4... What? They're removing 4v4 from the tournament pool. I guess there wasn't enough people doing 4v4 then in the tournaments. Well, there you go. Map pool updates. They've removed springtime and increased tide hunters. Like these are just to basically pad out the patch notes, let's face it. This doesn't really change or do much. It is nice, though, to change the maps. I will agree. Particularly for 4 versus 4 RT. Because they don't have enough options in 4 versus 4 RT. We lost Royal Gardens. That's a pretty good map, honestly. Nightopia, Ferocity. Yeah, that gets played a lot. Wellspring Temple. They've added Battleground. Full-scale Assault! That's the one with the dragon in the middle. Sexy Dawn likes that map. I find it a bit linear, though. Battleground is weird. I'm not sure what Battleground is. Ecclesium Maze just sounds like some really jank one from, like, Reign of Chaos that really shouldn't be played. But they probably just added it. They didn't even probably take a look at the map. Do you know what I mean? It's probably got a lot of sort of issues with it now. And Emerald Gardens, that is fecking huge, that map. Look, it's a 12-player map. That's that big free-for-all map. You know when I did like a 24-player 12 versus 12 or something a while ago? Quite some time ago now. It's on like Emerald Gardens. It wasn't 24-player because it's 12-player map, but yeah, it's like 6 versus 6 or something. Emerald Gardens. Yeah, it's a big, big, big map, that one. It'll be very, very powerful if you go triple heroes because there's a lot to creep on it. So this is, again, they've just kind of added stuff in. So effectively this patch is what units and heroes... Actually, to be honest, they have addressed the Ghoul Frenzy. That's the main thing. Ghoul Frenzy is definitely affecting like the top tier level of gameplay. But the rest of it is just kind of like, these things aren't used very much. Let's give them a little bit of a wacky buff and then see what the community say, and then we'll probably tone it down before the patch goes live. So I don't think Polymorph's going to last 3 seconds by the end of this patch. I don't think Torrent are necessarily going to be available at tier 2 by the end of this patch. I think that still might get reverted. Or, like I say, if they just make it so you can build them in the Bestiary or the Spirit Lodge. Probably the Spirit Lodge, because you can get the Spirit Walker as well at the same time. That'd be 4 units you can get from the same building. But I feel like the Torrent Totem is just too clunky. It just takes up so much space, and it's so massive and just sort of in the way. I get that each race typically have that. Although the Griffin Aviary can get Dragonhawk Riders. But the Undead have their own separate building for, like, Frostworms. So I kind of get it. And Chimeras obviously have their own separate building. I kind of get it. But I think the way Orc play, I don't think they benefit from the spirit, from the Taurens in the Tauren Totem. Anyway, that's my thoughts. What do you guys think? What do you think? Let me know. Have a good day. All the best.